Hello everyone, my name is Athan Atukunda, a director for Cairo Solutions. Following a journey which started years ago by our fathers, possibly even our great grandfathers and our grandfathers, a journey of our country to be liberated out of the energy poverty, a journey which has been full of very many dates being postponed. Finally, the dates may seem to draw closer. 2026 brings us that. Now, when we analyze the developments we have in the Tilenga and in the Kingfisher, our country in 2026 might be or is drawing to what I would call the first oil. A few months from now, if all things remain according to plan and developments take place and take shape as they are now, fingers crossed, we will soon have first oil ooze out of that pipeline in the jetty in Tanga. Now, the questions of whether how first oil will be considered in Uganda, whether it will be the oil entering the pipeline or it will be the oil oozing out in the pipeline in Tanzania, that's a question to be debated and to be agreed on by the presidents of our countries. However, as a country, we discuss and we have a question, or there are questions which still have been roaming around the public, of how does the country benefit. Now, following the final investment decision, which was signed in around 2022, the Ugandan revenues, or the revenues the country benefits out of the petroleum industry, are guided by the production sharing agreement. And now I'm going to take time to break down the production sharing agreement and how does the country benefit. Now, when they tell you that the country has over 15% in the oil or on the oil cake, you will think, oh, a country only takes 15%. But if a person goes down and breaks down this to the core, you will be surprised that the country actually ranges between 65% to 85% of the cake. And this is how it is to be done. Now, when you look at the entire thing or the entire industry, the production sharing agreements breaks down the revenues which come to the country in several ways. And these are the ways. One, you have what we call royalties. Two, you have what we call cost recovery. Three, you have what we call the profit oil. And three, you have what we call the corporate income tax. Now, these things, not forgetting the state participation of the country which is being protected by the company called UNOC, that's the Uganda National Oil Company. Now, royalties, when crude comes out of the ground, as a country, the law gives us, or the production sharing agreement gives us between 5% to 12.5% of the oil which is produced daily. So the percentages might vary based on the total daily production of the oil coming out of the ground. Now, when you have 10 barrels coming out of the ground, assume it right, before even it gets out, you have between 5% to 12.5% of the 10 barrels coming out of the ground. Now, the balance you have before or after subtracting the 5 to 12.5%, or if I actually try to make the math of the barrels, if you take that of the 10 barrels, the royalties, you will get around 1.25 barrels. Now that means on every 10 barrels, before you speak of anything, the money coming in form of royalties to the government of Uganda or to the community of Uganda. The second option is the cost recovery. That's the cost for oil. Now, this is meant to go to the companies, that's the UNOC and the Total. And this money is meant to allow the companies or these portion of the oil is meant to allow the companies to recover the money which has been spent in the exploration and the development of the oil fields. Now, this is around 60 to 70% of the remaining oil after royalties. Now, remember I explained about royalties. Royalties come first, and then these other percentages are dealt with. I'll call it the 87.5% of the crude oil. Now, as a country, that means it benefits first through royalties. That's non-negotiable. Now, the second thing, or the second portion where I'm playing in, the other dynamics of the cost recovery is what I'll give the cost, that's the 70 or the 60%. And now the third part is what we call the profit oil. So after the balance, that's around the 87.5%. If we take the 70% of that is what we take to the cost recovery, meant to recover the expenses, or I'll call it the capex of the development of the petroleum industry. That's meant to help us recover that. Now, when we go to profit oil, now that's beyond the 70%, that's the 30% of the oil after royalties. Mark the word after royalties. That means that's the 30% of the cost recovered after the cost recovery oil has been eliminated. The profit oil you're looking at, I would say, if I'm to make the math, the cost recovery will give you around 6.215 barrels. Now the profit oil comes after that, and it will be like around 2.625 barrels. Now the profit oil is meant to be shared between the government of Uganda and the companies. However, there are variances which might come with the percentages at the start. The companies might take more profit than the government, or the government might take more profit than the companies, depending on the decision which is to be taken, whichever way it benefits the country. However, the percentage is meant to decrease of the profit oil as time goes by. Now that means if Total or if Sino, they start taking a percentage, I would say maybe the whole 30%. Over the years, it is meant to deduct as the state of the country on the profit oil enlarges. So if it starts at 30% to 0%, give it 5 or 2 years, the country might be taking now 5%, and the other guys are taking maybe 25%. And there is that element of the deduction over time. And that way, by the end of the product lifeline, or the entire life cycle of the petroleum industry, the country might stand at a position where it takes the lion's share of the cost, all of the profit of the petroleum. Now, there is another thing which we may not consider, or which might be ignored, but trust me, it's the cash cow in the entire industry, and that is the corporate income tax. Now, the government charges over 30% over the corporate tax on the companies on the profit oil. Remember, I've told you the profit oil might be like 30%. Now, the 30%, you have to get a 30% on the 30% of the profit oil you're getting to get the amount of tax which the government charges. So, whichever way, if the company or the oil companies are taking 30% of the profit, 30% of the profit, the government is supposed to charge tax of 30% over that 30% of the profit oil. And that way, the government still either way keeps earning back to back. And now, as the country, we had to lay a strategy which would keep us in the game for the next years. Obviously, you couldn't let the country dominate the entire petroleum industry, and that is kudos to the people who thought out in the industry. And they thought out, look, we need to adopt a Ugandan oil company. And that's where the state interests are strictly kept or held by the Uganda National Oil Company. And in that takes us to what we call the midstream of the industry. And the midstream of the industry, you will notice that entails the pipeline which runs from Uganda to Tanzania. And this baby is meant to help the country transport out the oil from Uganda to Tanzania. Now, this is the thing. Imagine if over 60,000 barrels per day were being carried in a truck or in trucks, and those trucks every day have to travel from Tilenga to maybe Kenya, because Kenya is the nearest port we have. Every day, those number of trucks, there are too many, and the infrastructure would be strained. So what makes the EACOP realistic for you to have petroleum or crude oil being exported out of the country, the best infrastructure to lessen the pressure of the infrastructure would be, the ideal means of transport would be, again, it's EACOP. It keeps everything in check. So, with this infrastructure at play, there are still state interests and different companies playing this. And through that, we have Total Energies, we have UNOC, and we have UNOC, and obviously we have TPDC. This is meant to protect the interests of Tanzania, and UNOC to protect the interests of the country, and the two players who are financing this. And Total Energies stands at around 62%, UNOC stands at 8%, and UNOC and TPDC stand at 15%. Now, as a country, when this oil is being collected, or the funds are being collected, Your Excellency, the President of Uganda, has clearly pointed out that this money is meant to carry or to bring on to develop the infrastructure of the country. So this money has been developed, or is going to be settled in what we call a petroleum fund account. And now this account is strictly to be managed by the Bank of Uganda. And that's okay, because it ensures transparency in the entire sector. Kudos, fingers crossed, something might come up, or a few issues might come up, and it's okay. But it's meant to help the country grow. Now, the government might elect and still to give whatever and say its portion of oil to UNOC, and UNOC meant to market this oil on the international markets, because as UNOC, one of its priorities, or one of its key components, or one of its key reasons as why it was created is basically to run the oil interests of the country, I say the oil interests of the country on behalf of the country. So as the country, it may decide to do the in-kind payments, and the government may elect to receive its share of profit, oil, all in kind, which then could market. And that comes over the time. Now, as a country, there are various things which have come up, and this is meant to help the country, or to help the companies in the local space to participate in the cake of the oil and gas industry. And that's where the local content law comes at play. Now, the local content law is meant, or it protects the companies in the country to have or to play in the industry. And that's where we pray, or that's why we accredit the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. It has done a good job. Various companies or various players in Uganda, they have managed to secure a few priorities, or a few things within the industry where the companies are participating and they're earning. And according to the law, there are some sectors which have been totally ring-fenced for the Ugandan companies. And that is meant to protect, or to have the contract or some contracts awarded to the local companies. And because of that, a few companies are participating, or some of the companies are actually participating in this industry. Now, if you look at that and the breakdown of all the things in all the sectors I've explained, the country, one way or the other, benefits more at the start. This is one of the best deals, I think, ever bargained on the face of the earth in the oil and gas industry. The thing lies on us. How are we to utilize this industry? A few years from now, how can we secure the longevity and the peace in the country to have this resource benefiting us and not having a Dutch disease in the country? I remain Athana Tukunda. I'm out. Thank you.